Welcome.
Welcome.
Yeah, today we're going to dive into conflict.
Yes.
An important topic when we are thinking about relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to afford us the opportunity to revisit some of the concepts that we've shared in prior episodes with different stories and examples of conflicts.
Yes. Yeah, and we're going to cover off a few things. We've got some stories to share. And the stories are focused on particular aspects of this revisioning that we want to do. And we also want to just let you know that if you are following along in this podcast and we have talked about things that are confusing or you don't really fully understand, just be reassured that we are going to circle back to these topics over and over and over again. And every time we do so, we're going to do it from a new angle because we want these concepts to land. They are not easy to understand, and they do need multiple perspectives in order to kind of get the whole gestalt or the whole feel for how to use them as tools. Mm-hmm. So that's a part of our, this is how it's going to roll with us.
Right.
Welcome to Magenta FM, a show for people who aspire to deeper, richer, and more healthy ways of being in community, in leadership, and in relationship with others. I'm Louisa Barnum.
And I'm Rachel Hazlett-Carr. We will be talking about conflict from the sort of vantage point of taking back your power, which is a topic that we really dove into in episode 3.
Yeah.
But we will come back to it with a couple of different stories and examples of taking back your power in conflict. Mm-hmm. And then we're going to go into needs, which is the topic of the last episode 5. But we can look at a few different stories of conflict and how needs and strategies played into them, or we should say were central to them.
Yes.
Once you see it from this angle, you'll see that it was truly central to the conflict.
Yeah.
And then we want to touch on a concept of the enemy image.
Yeah, very important. You can't really talk about conflict without talking about enemy image making.
Yes, and how we take away people's humanities.
Yes.
In our mind's eye. So yes, we'll end on that note.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about that at a lot of different scales.
That's right.
Yeah.
Starting with taking back your power. And as I was thinking about conflict, and thinking about stories in my own life, I was thinking about my marriage, because that's an easy place where you have little conflicts. You know, you may not have big blow-ups, right? But there's little skirmishes, or people say things that bother you.
Yeah.
So a story came up for me, and then I brought this episode idea to my husband last night. I was telling him what we were recording today, and I asked him, and he had the same story.
Really?
So it's the most recent, for both of us.
Nice.
So we were able to revisit this story, and I have his permission to share it.
That. Poor old husband.
He's so great though. Yeah. So, okay, but we have an idea for how we're going to share this story, which is the story of a recent conflict. And we're going to call this the fork in the road. So this story it could have gone one of two ways, or it could go many ways. Our conflicts, life presents us with circumstances, and we can take them in a variety of different ways. So I'm going to tell a story of how this conflict can go. Mm-hmm. So here's the setup. I'm being a bit vulnerable by sharing.
Good for you.
Yeah. Okay. So the setup is that I made an investment with our shared money that went south.
Oh, boy.
And it was enough money that it hurt.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And that we were feeling it.
Are we talking about 4 figures or 5 figures?
I won't go into
or 3
that.
figures.
Yeah.
But it hurt.
It hurt.
Okay.
Yeah. And this was a decision that I it was something that I had come across and shared it with my husband. And got his okay on this decision. But it was, my
Initiative.
Initiative. Yes, exactly. So the other night we're reviewing our finances and reviewing this, investment that's gone south as part of the big picture. And some feelings are coming up for my husband around it.
Yeah.
And bless his heart, he says, I'm trying to not begrudge you for this investment that didn't go the way that we thought it was going to. My response was to get defensive and hurt feelings and angry
And shame.
Yeah, lots of feelings coming up.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the setup. So my husband says, I am trying to not begrudge you for this money. And this is the fork in the road moment where
what happened
things
next?
can go many different ways. So
Yeah.
we're going to explore a few different ways a few different, steps that can happen from there.
It's a bit of a choice point, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yeah, like a, sliding door kind of thing.
Yeah.
One path from that is I get offended and hurt and angry and accuse him of being all kinds of ways that I don't like. Storm out of the room, storm back in the room with a few more things to say, and storm out of the room again until he comes at some point. Maybe it's later that night or the next morning
When everyone's calmed down a bit.
when everyone's calmed down and says, I'm sorry that I, said that, but really he doesn't feel sorry because he feels like, well, that's what I was feeling, but this is what I'm supposed to do. I should say sorry, even though I was feeling kind of begrudging, but my wife's mad. So I'm going to say sorry. And then I forgive him and we kiss and make up and move on.
It sounds like me in my relationship.
Well, there's a reason I can tell the story with such vivid detail.
Because we've all experienced it.
So fortunately,
that's not what happened?
That's not what happened.
Oh, okay. What happened?
So what happened was I did have some feelings come up in response to his comment. I noticed myself sort of pull away, emotionally, probably physically. I did feel hurt and offended.
Right.
And in that moment, I was able to see that I was triggered. And this is like the way that we use the word triggered. So it was a compulsion. I wasn't exploding. I wasn't falling apart, but I was in this compulsive response.
Right.
And because of the work that I've done, and the way that I, know my wounds and I can see them and name them, I could see, oh, Rachel, you are feeling shame because you believe that, I believe that I need to be perfect and the best.
Right.
And to be, loved and safe.
Right.
And so I felt shame that my decision was not the best one. It was not the right one. It wasn't perfect. So I had these beliefs about myself coming up. And then simultaneously some beliefs about the world that I hold that I've got its number because I've been around it. So I know this tendency to sort of distrust the world, and I can project that onto my partner very easily if I feel like he's not being trustworthy and we're not on the same team anymore, and he's not really being my teammate, and I only can trust myself right now is sort of the belief that comes up. And this isn't like on the surface, I'm able to name these because of the work that I've done,
Right.
and the work that we teach in the school. So I was able to say that in the moment.
So you expressed that to him.
I expressed that to my husband, that I was feeling triggered, that these beliefs were coming up, which he's familiar with because we share these things with each other. And I unhooked from the dynamic that I was starting to get into.
So by naming it, you were owning it.
Yes.
You were saying, I'm triggered. This is why. This is what's going on. This is why I'm feeling this way. It's mine. It's not about you.
Yeah.
What happened then?
Yeah. So then he was still feeling his feelings that were coming up. And as much as he was trying, he did feel begrudging. As much as he was trying to do the right thing and, do what he thought he should do.
Yeah.
But I was able to just be present for him and his feelings without taking it personally and, with sort of curiosity, just hold space.
And let him feel what he feels.
Right.
Without you getting triggered by it.
Yes.
Right.
And then through that, he was able to come to his own insights about why he was going to begrudging.
Okay, so you got me on tender hooks. What did he...
Okay, so the insight that he came to was that he has a pattern of wanting to put the decision making in someone else's hands or not take responsibility because then he doesn't have to take responsibility when things fail or go south.
Because he's protecting himself from shame.
Yeah.
Wow.
So he was begrudging toward me, even though he had put that decision in my hands or had agreed to go along with the decision.
Right.
And so he was able to come to this new insight, and then, and now we both have those insights moving forward. And so it's just like these capacities and these insights just build on each other, and it just makes our relationship so much stronger and smoother. We have more intention when it comes to like the next decision,
right?
And the next,
so he can step up.
Yeah.
More
yes.
And
exactly.
not leave it all in your hands or step into his reservations.
Yeah.
And then you both can
work through that.
Yeah.
And speak our truth through it. And I think the first scenario, the picture that I painted, while that scenario did end in, kissing and making up, it didn't end in like capacity building. Right?
Or greater connection or.
Right. And then you had a good insight about the next time that this kind of issue comes around again, because it's money.
Yes. Money is one of those major triggers. Money, sex, and food. Those are the three biggies. Don't talk about those without permission. Let's put it that way. I think the next time it comes around, it's even more difficult. Right. It's like you have less capacity. Yeah. You're either growing or you're dying in capacity kind of thing in a relationship.
Yes.
So that's how the straw breaks the camel's back.
Yes. Yeah. Because there's a little bit, we say we forgive, but there may be a little bit resentment that's, or that memory just comes back real quick. Like, well, remember the last time?
Yeah. You always, or you never.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So
cool story.
So I wanted to share the story because it's, it's a good example of taking your power back in the moment and,
through owning
it. Yeah. Through owning my own trigger, my own wound, and, why I was taking it personally, what he was saying. And as my husband and I were talking about this last night, it was very mild what he said, but we know each other so well, of course, because we're married. So I could feel his feelings coming up.
Right.
But even if he had been like explosively mad, this power was still in my hands to not get hooked, to
And
unhook.
right. Unhook.
And not take it
yeah.
personally.
Yeah.
And unhook, in which case I could help him discharge. And of course, if someone becomes, explosive in a way that's emotionally violent or name calling. I mean, we don't ever go there in our relationship, but if one was to do that, then you can still put up a boundary and in a way that's dispassionate and take care of yourself in that way. So I'm not saying that, that there's never a need for that, but regardless of how extreme or subtle or, intending hurt or not intending hurt is on the other side of the table. The power is still in your hands.
The power is still in your hands. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about needs.
Yeah.
So you didn't mention, you didn't mention needs.
Right. So, and there were needs coming up for me. But really those needs were not about my husband. And I know that because I've done this work and I've been around this enough to know that this was not a situation or a dynamic where I needed to ask a need of him.
Right.
For
you had no request of him, did you?
No, I didn't have a request of him. But I did have needs that I needed to meet myself.
So it wasn't about him getting those needs met.
Right. You mean meeting those needs?
Yeah, you met them.
I met them, yes.
Yeah.
I had a need for acceptance of myself.
Ah, interesting.
Which I met.
Yeah.
And I had a need for trust.
In yourself.
In myself and in the world.
Right, in the world.
And trusting that I did not marry someone who is not on my team.
Right.
I married a very good teammate.
Yeah.
And even if they have a moment of, being irritated with me, that doesn't mean that they are not trustworthy.
Right.
Or that they're not on my side.
Right.
And if I start going into that spiral, that's not really about them. That's about my own stuff.
Yeah.
So there were needs that came up and they were needs that I was able to meet in myself.
Right.
For myself.
Right. That's really cool. So let's just do a little, a summary maybe of the steps of what just happened in that story.
Why don't you summarize? Why don't you reflect back maybe what you hear, what you took away as a listener?
Well, what I heard was you were talking about money, which is one of the top 3 triggers in any situation. And there was an issue with money, which is triggering for both of you. And instead of going down the fork in the road of defensiveness and triggers and acting out of the triggers, and in a way just continuing the habit and compulsiveness of acting out the trigger and the anger and the defensiveness and protecting yourself from feelings of shame, instead you owned how you felt and what you were believing. Because what you recognized is it was about you. You were triggered because of you. And his feelings and his expression of his feelings were about him. And so, but what happened was you started it. You started by saying, I'm noticing that I'm triggered and I'm seeing that I'm triggered because of some beliefs that I have about lack of trust in myself and a lack of trust in the world. And I see it now. I don't need to go there. And that not only did that free your husband from
my wrath.
Exactly. Exactly. From your projection.
Yeah.
He was also able to build on that by saying, I'm also having an insight about my trigger and where I'm going, like what I'm believing.
Right.
And that brought you closer together. That meant the next time you have the conversation, there's greater capacity between you and your teamwork and your partnership to work things through with more trust and greater transparency and less likelihood of getting triggered around the same things again.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah,
Is there
great
anything?
summary.
Oh, yes. But the last thing was the needs. So in this instance
yes.
of conflict or potential conflict, there wasn't actually a need to make a request of the other to help you get your need met. You could meet it all by yourself.
Yeah.
And you took your power back at the same time.
Yeah.
So what about a conflict where there is a need that is not being met and it needs to be met by the partner?
Right.
Should we talk about that next?
We should. Well, let's take a short break and then we will come back to needs and conflict.
Okay, awesome.
Would you like a serious solution to your people problems? One that is deep and lasting? Would you like to be able to raise the quality of interactions you have with the people in your life and work? Most people believe that the solution to ongoing people problems, such as conflict and misunderstanding, is memorizing the right thing to say or some other clever tactic. However, there are always situations where such tactics simply won't apply or succeed. Instead, you need something that can help you be present and generative in every interaction, every moment, no matter how unexpected or difficult or how high the stakes are. The truth is, you can shape the interactions you have merely through the quality of your presence. Unfortunately, an authentic and elevated quality of presence doesn't come easily or naturally any more than playing the violin does, because it's a trained and honed way of being. Like a master of Tai Chi, you can learn to work with the social spaces between you and others, not with manipulation, nor with dominance or force, but with a greater freedom, greater understanding and generosity, and a stronger presence of mind. Imagine having the kind of presence that commands respect, not because you're the alpha, but because others rise to meet you there. Imagine attracting in your life and work the kinds of high-functioning relationships that you long for. Magenta Academy for the Social Arts has developed a path to help you grow an elevated presence. Join the Elevated Presence Masterclass, where you will begin building a foundation for transforming your relationships. Enrollment opens soon, don't miss out. Go to magenta.fm/elevated presence to get on the waitlist.
Okay, welcome back.
Yes.
All right, so take it away, Louisa, with
Was it my turn for
needs and
story?
conflict.
Okay, but I loved your story. That was so cool.
Oh, thanks.
It could go one way or the other. And thank God it went the second way. Well, I just hope that was clear about the choice point that Rachel had. Well, both Rachel and her husband had right there. That's really cool. So conflict. And again, I'm bringing a story actually that is a marriage story as well. And I think we probably, on balance, may talk more about marriage than other relationships. So I hope that in our imagination, we can apply these lessons from marriage, which is the most intimate of relationships, right? That and also children, obviously. But it's such a difficult area because more than 50% of people get divorced. I mean, it's such a difficult and painful thing. And that's the story I'm actually going to bring. I'm sorry. But I hope that we can, in our imagination, apply this to any number of different relationships. Mm-hmm. In-laws, for instance, is another very difficult and painful area. Or it can be. So the story, and this story is really chosen because the people involved never learned how to either identify nor did they learn to ask to get their needs met. So they remained unaware of what they actually needed, which ended in, terrible consequences. So this is a story, I'm going to tell it from the point of view of Kathy. It's not her real name, but she was a woman who was in a marriage for a long time, 20 years. She could not get her needs met in her marriage. She felt unseen and unappreciated. They had kids, so she felt like her labor was invisible. So the labor that women so often do, of holding the family together, not just physically with managing all the different aspects of the logistics of children and school and food and everything, but also the emotional labor of holding the whole in the ways that mothers so often do. She felt completely unrecognized in that work. But by the same token, her husband felt completely also unrecognized, because he believed that she held a lot of disdain for him, because she was always so angry with him. And so they went along like this until she found out that he'd been having affairs, but he'd been having them all along. And for her, that was, unacceptable. And so she filed for divorce. But pretty quickly she realized, so this is after 20 years of doing this, right? And then she realized that it's quite possible that it could be a very conflictual divorce process, and therefore could be very expensive. Because not only did they have 20 years of life intertwined financially, but they also had children in custody. And they had zero trust. So how do you work that through in a divorce process? Well, it can get so messy. And she decided then and there that she was going to have a divorce where it would be done with love. She would find a way to go through this divorce process and listen to him, try and understand his needs, and not get into conflict. So she chose a lawyer or a law firm that would help her with that, and not a lawyer that was out for blood, which is very possible. You have a choice of different qualities of lawyers. Oh yeah, right. So they went through the process, but in order to do that, she had to come to terms with her needs. She had to come to understand what she needed, and her culpability in the failure of the relationship. That she had needs. She had a need for connection, for recognition, for appreciation for all of what she was doing for the family. She had a need for partnership and teamwork. She wanted a partner to work through all the issues that family life brings in her life. And she wanted a lover, all of these things that are very reasonable. But how did she ask for them? Well, she asked for them with disdain, by pushing him away, by criticizing him, and by resenting him. Those were her strategies. I know it sounds silly from this sort of bird's eye view, but that's literally how many relationships fail.
It's so true.
Because we use these strategies to try and get these very important, very beautiful needs met, but the strategies themselves will get us the exact opposite. Yeah. Not just not getting needs met, but the opposite. Right. This is a phenomena that I have observed over 15 to 20 years of doing this work. I can't even remember how many years. But this is what I have observed over and over and over again. It's the opposite rule. Okay. Yeah. So, what she learned is that this is what she had done, and his strategy, as unfortunate as it is, was to find love and connection and respect and partnership elsewhere, outside of the marriage, with his affairs, because he didn't know how to ask for that from his wife, and he didn't know how to get out of the relationship because they had kids. He felt trapped, and this is so often what can happen with extramarital affairs. What you have to understand is that everybody involved, it's a terribly destructive thing to do to a relationship. It really is. And for a relationship to survive an intermarital affair, you have to understand that's the end of your marriage. The question is, do you want to start a new one together or apart? It's possible to do. But what's being expressed is something that I call the epigenetics of the soul. And, we have epigenetics of the physical body, right? Where you can see the family patterns or the family tendencies, genetic
so like
tendencies.
Something that happened to the grandparents that affected their genes. This is
right. That's the
on
theory.
the material level. is seen in a grandchild or a great grandchild.
Yeah, through a physical causality that has been passed down through the generations. But I think there's a corresponding picture for the epigenetics of the soul, and we know this from trauma studies.
Right, and maybe they're one and the same.
I know.
Which comes first?
Yeah, which comes first? Well, you can't say, can you? I think I have an opinion about that, and it's a working theory, but so far it has held true, and I'm not the only one who really sees this to be true, and that is the physical body always follows the soul. It's not the other way around. So when you see epigenetics playing out through generations, it's not like the epigenetics caused the trauma, right? It's the trauma that is passed down. So when we talk about the epigenetics of the soul, what we're looking at are the inheritance of unmet needs and the strategies that people try or implement to try and get those needs met. And infidelity is a surprisingly common example of that. And in every single client that I've ever had where they're bringing the pain of infidelity into our process, I look for infidelity in their family pattern, and it's always there.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. I don't know if that's the case with absolutely every single person, right?
But in your experience,
that's what I've always, yes. And it's somewhere in there. And I believe the reason is because we learn our strategies from our family of inheritance. Our strategies for disconnecting, for violence, for emotional violence, for protective mechanisms of various nature, for infidelity. These are all supraconsciously or unconsciously, it's probably a much better way of putting it, learned. Even if we don't know that. And this is what's so fascinating is it's often surprising for people to, even though they knew it because they were able to tell me from memory that, oh yeah, granddad did this, and then mom also did this, and it nearly ruined my parents' relationship, but they somehow put it back together again. It's like, you see, it's in your family. Oh, people don't always realize that this is passed down until we become aware, until we bring it into the light of our consciousness, and then the buck stops with us.
Yes,
right. Otherwise, we're gonna keep repeating the strategies that we know, and infidelity is a very effective strategy. And yet, when it happens, it feels like the only option. It's the only option left on the table, and the pain has been there for so long, and the belief that you can never get your need met in this relationship has so sort of cemented in the person that they believe this is their only real possibility. Those are the examples that are passed through my practice.
Interesting.
And other people are going to have different ideas or stories about infidelity that have showed up in their lives, but this is the pattern that I've seen.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's my story. Oh, let me just finish it.
Yeah.
So they ended up in divorce, obviously. She found a way through that. So now they are better friends than they were when they were married. So they sometimes, they can do things together as a family, even though they're divorced.
Oh, that's so beautiful.
Yeah, and that way the kids were protected as much as they could be.
Yeah, good for them.
Yeah.
Wow, good for her for taking that on.
Yeah.
And it sounds like it took a crisis, or it took something really big,
really destructive.
Really destructive coming into her divorce. But good for Kathy. Yeah, I commend her.
There's so many women out there who do that.
Yeah.
And they remain unacknowledged in such a powerful act of love that they can do that. Instead, this is the fork in the road.
Yeah.
Am I going to choose the viper of a lawyer Or am I going to choose the lawyer that can help me have a divorce that is filled with love and healing?
Yeah. A story that comes up for me around needs is around being a single mom and dating.
Oh boy.
Yeah. When my husband and I were dating, and I had a son, have my son, and I had certain needs around, stability and reliability. And I worked really hard to create, a certain rhythm. And I really protected my son from my dating life. I didn't like bring him into my dating life until, I really knew like, okay, this guy, I think he's he's it. I think, I may, stay with him for the long haul. So we started introducing, the whole family dynamic and bringing my husband into our rhythms. And this was really new for my husband. He was a single guy.
He didn't have any kids.
He didn't have any kids. Right. No. And so, there were things around like reliability or timeliness or, coming home in time for dinner at 6:00, or coming, to our house for dinner in time, at 6:00 for dinner. There was definitely a fear of owning that request, of owning that need for that reliability, because of this deep fear that, is this going to be too much?
Oh, is he up for it?
Is he up for it? Yeah.
Right.
And is he up
for
for
a kid?
All of this obligation that comes along with dating me and, or more, you know?
This is for all the single moms out there. This
Yes,
story.
Exactly. Because it was scary. Even though I knew about NVC and I knew about needs, and I could still just see this fear in me of being really explicit with this request around, reliability and communication and what my needs were around, family rhythms and things like that.
How did it go?
Well, it's interesting because I wasn't reticent in getting mad at him when he would be late.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So he could, he may come late and I would get, so annoyed or so mad. And eventually, after a few times of this, I did own the need that was driving, my irritation and my frustration. And in a time of not being triggered, I was able to, have conversations with him about what my needs were and why these were my needs and what's important for me and why I need reliability and why I need reliability for my son and this rhythm. And, and if you can't make it, if you're not going to be able to make it home, then communicate. So that way we are, we're all on the same page. And, and that was so helpful for my husband because this was a whole new world for him. And he didn't know about these needs of children. And so we were able, and there were times, and I did have to cut him some slack. I did have to, allow for sort of this capacity building within him, to build this capacity.
To learn how to become that kind of reliable.
Exactly,
Yeah.
which he did, and he stepped into, and I could see it right away.
He sure did.
He did.
He married you.
No, yeah.
But okay, so something that you mentioned earlier was about the single moms out there who are now dating. What is your message for them?
Oh, well, there's a few messages. I mean, one thing that helped me when I, finally like dug deep and said, I'm gonna, be clear and explicit with this request is that, was like, Rachel, it's better to know now than later, if he's going to be up for this,
Right.
learn now.
Right.
Whether he is or not.
Right.
But my message is that there are people who are up for it.
Right.
And there are people who aren't.
Right.
You know, and it's a process of learning, you know, who's up for it and who's not. But I
Right.
know that
There are people who
there are people like
Yeah.
my husband, and there's so many others, you know, wonderful men who step into a family and take on the responsibility and take on the labor of love and,
and
you
who
know,
will love your children.
yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So it really, my
Yeah.
story has, you know, such a happy ending. And
Right.
I think
or
that's
happy beginning.
Yeah, that's true. That's
Yeah.
true. My dating journey, yes, had a happy, you know,
That's true.
transition
Thank
into
God
marriage.
you don't have to date anymore.
I know.
Yeah.
You know, and it probably was those fears. They probably were a big part of what made dating so challenging.
Yeah.
Plus,
Right.
you know, I think for all women, even not single moms, you know,
Right.
you have to, you know what you're wanting and
Right.
be clear about that. Know what you're
Right.
needing, whether that's for your children or for
yourself.
For yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, that's interesting that you mentioned that. I think that's an excellent point. And this is a dialogue I've been having with my 18-year-old daughter. She's out in the world dating, right? But even before then, when she was with her friends in high school, and really struggling with some high school behaviors amongst the girls, and experiencing something of what we're actually going to talk about next. But let me just kind of slip in there or slide in there quite by accident. And that is that she was having an experience of a bunch of girls suddenly turning against her. And she wasn't sure whether to go along with it because that was her friend group. And she didn't really have a community of friends else other than that. And she didn't want to be completely alone. Because I mean, what teenager wants that? I mean, the peer relationships are so important for teenagers, almost more important than the day-to-day relationship with parents. I mean, obviously, parents are fundamental, but for the growing teenager, they just go through an incredible amount of growth, second only to from 0 to 3. It's just an astonishing amount of social emotional growth. And so there she was, struggling with this issue. And what it came down to is, are you going to compromise on your needs? Or are you just going to say, you know what, this behavior is actually unacceptable to me. And I'm going to put a boundary there. I'm going to say no to it. It might mean that I'm going to be alone, maybe for the rest of my life. You know, she's a teenager,
teenager, right? Exactly.
But it's unacceptable to me to be treated this way. And I think there's a lesson for us all in this picture is we do have beliefs. Oh my God, I'm going to be alone the rest of my life. I have to put up with this, or my job is on the line because coworkers are gossiping. Yeah. And all of a sudden I'm public enemy number one. I don't know what they're saying about me, but they all believe it. Yeah. And they're all believing that I'm a culprit of some kind. Yeah. You know, it's terribly destructive and corrosive behavior. So gossip is one of the number one problems in companies and for attrition in companies.
Yeah, and toxic workplaces.
So toxic. Gossip is the place to address this. It begins in lower school, and it continues on through high school, and by golly, we're still doing it when we're adults. Yeah. And I think we ought to know better. Yeah. So anyway, coming back from that digression. So there she was with needs. Needs for how to be treated, how to be spoken to, how to be held by another person, like held with respect instead of, treated poorly or with disdain.
So this was like schoolyard girls kind of ganging up or turning against one and gossip and other, destructive behaviors ensuing. Yeah. Okay.
And all of a sudden sort of turning against her and saying mean things about her behind her back. But then one of them saying, oh, everybody else is saying these mean things about you. Ooh, yeah. This kind of behavior.
Yeah. And so she's left with, okay, what do I do now?
Yeah.
Do I just,
Do I suck it up
yeah.
because I believe I have no other choice?
Yeah.
Because if I reject these people on the basis of their behavior, I will have zero friends.
Yeah.
And I'll have zero community, and I'll be isolated. I will say that that point was right when she was actually leaving that school and going to another school. So there was a way out for her.
Yeah.
However, it didn't feel like that at the time.
Right. Because it's an eternity when you're a child
Yes.
too. 3 months from now.
Yeah.
That's an eternity.
Yeah. And also she thought that these are people in her community. You know, we live in a small town.
Yeah.
It's not like she could escape from them forever.
Yeah.
Right? And it just felt so painful that people would believe that about her and say such awful things about her that she did not deserve, right?
Yeah.
But imagine if you're an adult and you're at work and you are in that situation where people are, you're going along and getting along just fine. And then the next day, all of a sudden, everyone's like out to get you because somebody said something, and then it's just awful. Right?
Yeah.
Okay. So this reason why we're talking about this.
Yeah, we're getting to
our point.
Here.
Yes, our main point that we said in the very beginning. And the reason why this is important is because what we do when we gossip is we create a two-dimensional enemy image of the other. This is also what we do when we get triggered by another person. So if you remember back to Rachel's story of the fork in the road, the difference that what happened and the reason why she chose one rather than the other is because she chose to own her trigger, which gave her husband back his full humanity. If she had gone down the first fork, which was to act out of her trigger and all of her feelings and to make it his problem and to make it his fault, what she was doing is, as you described, was saying that he was the world, believing that he was the world and he couldn't be trusted.
Yeah.
And that's the two-dimensional image.
Yeah.
And that is what we call projection, right? So so what we want to do now is just really describe what we mean by two-dimensional. Enemy image. This is a concept that comes straight out of nonviolent communication, and it's such a powerful idea. Because this is what we do in conflict. So I'm going to have an attempt at giving a definition for enemy image. I confess it will be not as good as how Marshall Rosenberg describes it. So I really highly recommend you read his book because it's been a while since I've actually described it, but I'll do my best. At any rate, this will get you started, but please do read his book. It's just a fantastic read. And the book will reinforce everything that Rachel and I have been saying all through these episodes, because he's describing basically what it's like to take your power back in extreme examples of conflict, and not so extreme, but he's got some amazing hair-raising stories in there of how you can take your power back even in situations where your life is threatened through through the acknowledgement of feelings and needs. So powerful and amazing. Anyway, so what we do when we move through life, as we've said before, but it bears repeating, we look through life until we learn otherwise. We look through life through a particular lens that is colored by how we internalize our life experiences and how we internalize the epigenetics of our soul, of how we inherit the family of experiences, right? The ancestors. And we internalize those in unconscious ways until we learn to bring them into our consciousness through the work of our higher self, through cognition and healing that we do out of our own effort. This is what healing takes. It takes effort. So, and Until we get to that, though, basically what we do is we assess the world through this lens colored by our internalization. There's another word for that, or there's a single word for that, and it's called projection. So basically what we do is we project until we learn otherwise. So that's it. We project all the time.
Yeah.
And we assess the world and we project onto the world. And so the goal of taking back your power is to take back your projection. And projection itself is a two-dimensional image projected onto the other. That's why it's called a projection, because it's like a slide projector onto the screen. It's a two-dimensional picture. Mm-hmm. This has far-reaching implications because in the stories that we shared, Rachel's story and then my story of Kathy, these are stories of what happens with projection, of our triggers with the other person.
Sometimes I need to check myself if I'm making a two-dimensional enemy image of the other.
How do you do that?
Normally just asking the question is enough. Like asking myself, like, Rachel, are you taking away this person's humanity? That's the way that I like to frame it. Like, am I seeing them as a whole person? Uh-huh. And even if they are, doing something that I don't think is right, mm-hmm. I know at this point that I can take care of myself mm-hmm. and take care of my needs mm-hmm. and respect myself without making the other person into a villain or a
perpetrator.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, let's talk about three-dimensional as opposed to two-dimensional.
Yeah.
So how do you experience, like, we talked about the two-dimensionality of the enemy image.
Right.
But what does it look like to actually give them back their three-dimensionality?
Yeah. If somebody is acting a certain way, that is, say they're acting out. Well, I come back to my own belief mm-hmm. that all people are that are three-dimensional, inherently at their core, good people mm-hmm. who sometimes behave in bad ways out of mm-hmm. their own trauma or wounds or fear or insecurity, or maybe I'm misinterpreting mm-hmm. how they're behaving. Mm-hmm. That I don't believe that on an individual level there are people who are all bad. I believe that everyone has a higher self.
So the picture I'm hearing is that you are choosing to invest in the higher self of the other. That's kind of how I see it. So you invest in the higher self of the other by not assuming that they are just a two-dimensional enemy image, that's all that they are.
Right. And, making attempts to meet the higher self of the other through curiosity and through listening. And even if we're not able to, we just, you don't take it personal and just know that people are, doing the best they can.
Yeah, that reminds me of what Rosenberg says. He says, it's the only way that they know how to communicate. However violent it is, it's the only way they know. Mm-hmm. It's the only strategy that they've learned. Mm-hmm. And that's what they're dishing out.
Yeah.
And I find that it's not untruthful, right? Mm-hmm. It's choosing to have a compassionate point of view on the truth.
Yeah. And it's not the same as tolerating toxicity.
No, that's right. It's not the same. Let's not conflate these things.
Yeah, exactly. It's, you don't have to choose to be obsequious or
I love that word.
people pleasing or silencing your own truth or tolerating,
bad behavior.
Bad behavior.
Yeah.
Or verbal violence or physical violence or any of that.
Yeah.
So learning that there are ways to take care of yourself and to take care of your needs and to respect yourself that are not dependent
Yeah.
on the people around you.
Yeah. 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 So, giving back to somebody their full humanity, but at the same time, holding them accountable to their behavior. We can do this.
Yeah.
And we must do this.
Yeah.
And just at risk of being rather dramatic, I think we must, because world peace, right? I sound like a beauty queen. World peace. So the reason why I'm saying that is we have given examples of, where we create enemy images on a daily basis or on a day-to-day sort of level of relationship where we all know what we're talking about. Like, if you're in a marriage, you know what Rachel and I are talking about. But even if with your friends or with your family or whatever,
or a business partner,
business partners or colleagues, you know what we're talking about because you have these experiences, perhaps even on a daily basis, of making an enemy image of someone that you know or someone doing the same back to you and the consequences of that.
Yeah.
But let's talk about this at scale.
Right.
Because right now, at the time of this podcast, Ukraine, and let's just call it what it is, NATO, is waging war with Russia. And there is an example of enemy image making, because how else is it possible to justify killing another human being? And when you supply weapons like America is doing through NATO to Ukraine, that is what you are doing. You have made an enemy image of an entire nation of people. And so when the war first broke out, I remember there were stories of concerts where Russian pianists had been were going to give a performance and they were cancelled. And not only that, it got more absurd. There were performances of Tchaikovsky, who's a fantastic Russian composer, was cancelled because he's
the
Russian.
composer.
Because of the composer who's been dead, however many hundreds of years, not that many, but 100 years.
Or Russian restaurants being boycotted in New York City or in other cities where people are just living their lives.
Yes, they're just ordinary people like you and me.
Yeah.
But then all of a sudden, they're the enemy. That is two-dimensional enemy image making. It's justified genocide in Africa, but also here in America. Slavery is it's astonishing.
Right.
The power of this, and this ideological two-dimensional enemy imaging that is happening in America right now. Like, if you're a Democrat, what do you really believe and feel about Republicans?
Right.
Just to be honest with yourself. Or the other way around, if you're a Republican, what do you believe about someone who has a Democratic political ideology?
Yeah.
This is what we're doing to each other, and it must stop. It must stop. Otherwise, we will never be able to together co-create a different future.
Yeah.
Not just for ourselves, but for our children.
Yeah.
Because the buck has to stop with us, with this enemy image making. And it comes down to you and me learning how to not do it. Because if you and me, as just these tiny little individuals, right, we're one of 7 billion people, it's very overwhelming, I get it. But if you and me can stop doing that to each other, and then you and me and our husbands, and then you and me and our husbands and others, and it has this ripple effect in the world, and then all of a sudden there's that tipping point where enough of us are saying, we just don't want to create enemy images anymore, not of each other, and then we cannot be tools of manipulation. But so long as we participate on a very small level between us, which also, because how we do one thing is how we do everything, so long as we participate in the enemy image making, we can be tools of manipulation. In other words, tools for propaganda.
Yeah.
We are being manipulated by our media, by our governments all over the world. The governments of this world are not going to stop it. It's just not going to happen. So don't look to them. But what's going to stop it is ordinary people like you and me who understand what enemy image making is and why it exists, and we learn through our own experience of healing it, that is how we change the world. Because we deeply understand the consequences of these behaviors that we have not been aware of. So long as we are unaware of it, we are manipulatable. We give away our power, and that power is used. Okay? It's not like you give away your power and then you have no power. That power goes somewhere else. And this is a kind of this is not a concept that I can provide lots of supporting evidence for. This is really something that this is a sort of a working theory. It's something that I believe and I know to be true. And I really encourage anyone who's listening to this particular or hearing this particular concept of power, do with it whatever you want. I really don't mind. You can take it or leave it. But I want you to just think it through for at least a moment. If just, bear with me or humor me. If you give away your power because you haven't yet done the work of understanding where and how you make enemy images of another person, what happens to that power? What is done with it? Well, what I'm suggesting is that it's taken and it's used. So, for instance, if you allow yourself to make an enemy image of the Republicans or the Democrats, we live in California, so most people are Democrats, right? Of the Republicans, let's say, that is used, right? Because then you are incensed by the media, who is manipulating you into reinforcing the enemy image of the Republicans. I mean, this is like normal, okay? Yeah. Trying to influence the vote. So do you see? So long as you remain unaware and unconscious about your enemy image making, it can be used. That's what I mean by not only are you giving away your power, you're giving away your power to other people who then use it. Well, it'll be interesting to see if we get any comments about that, like, what the hell are you talking about? And then we can talk more about it, because I think it's really interesting, because these are invisible fields. They cannot be measured. They cannot be touched. They are completely invisible, these spaces between us, and how power is used. It reminds me of, and we can get into this in another episode also, but like bullying behavior, yes. If you give your power away to a bully, by allowing their arrows that they're shooting at you to land and take you down, and you blame them for your feelings instead of taking responsibility for your feelings and not letting those words tear you down. But if you succumb, then they just have that much more power. Yes, you're giving away your power to someone. Yes. Yeah. That's a good example of a kind of a human scale example of what I'm talking about. Right. Yeah. So, conflict, what happens when we're in conflict? So we got to cover a few different aspects and examples of conflict. So the first was my story of the fork in the road. My two stories. One was fictional, fortunately, and one was true. And it was a story of taking back your power, taking back my power, and how there was healing in that. And greater capacity built as a consequence. Yes, that's right. And a strengthening of a relationship instead of a destruction or fracturing of a relationship. And then we went into needs and conflict, stories of conflict that involve needs, unmet needs or unspoken needs, or what comes up for us, what can come up for us when we try to get our needs met and we don't know how to. And until we learn, we only have what has been passed down to us, which can be really unfortunate, like affairs, or getting really angry when someone walks in the door late. And then we finished with
the enemy image and how important it is for us to really work with this concept in regards to conflict and get to know it in our own, personal conflicts in our life. And seeing it at different scales from, gossiping on the schoolyard or in the workplace, which creates a very toxic work environment. If one person is, made into a two-dimensional image, and all the way to, global conflict and how
and people getting away with it.
Yeah, we can make an enemy image of a whole
country,
nation.
Yeah,
exactly.
Astonishing.
Yeah,
and one thing just occurred to me: racism, I think, is a picture of enemy image making.
Yeah.
Because it's an implicit bias,
right? And
this is what we do: we look through a lens and we're biased.
Yeah.
In all these different ways, and racism is it's a disease of consciousness, as bias is. And how do we heal from that disease? Well, we heal from that disease by cleaning the lens through which we're assessing everything.
Yeah.
By taking back our power.
Yeah.
That's how we do it.
Yeah. Okay. Do you have anything else that you want to add?
Oh my God. We could we could go on for a long time.
Yeah.
But we'll just pick it up. We're not quite, we have lots of fun conversations about what we're going to talk about in the next episode.
Yeah.
So we don't actually know at this point what we're going to talk about. But rest assured, we are going to keep revisiting all of these concepts, but in different ways with different stories and from different angles.
Yeah.
So we just encourage you to keep listening, because even if we throw in a curveball and you're like, what the heck? Just stay with us, because these are new and difficult concepts. I mean, my goodness, Rachel and I have been working with them for years.
Yeah.
And we really want to shorten the learning curve for everyone who comes across our stuff. In the school and in this podcast and everywhere, whatever touch point we create, that's our mission, is to create a runway for souls that didn't exist, and to really shorten this learning journey. These are hard-earned tools and knowledge, and it's taken us many years to put it together.
And that brings up something for me also that I just want listeners to make sure they're cutting themselves some slack.
Oh, yeah.
And don't be too hard on yourself. And I hope what you can take away from our shared, stories, the personal stories that we're sharing, that this is a work in progress. And we've been doing this work for a long time, and we're still working at it.
We sure are.
So don't let this, send you into a shame spiral.
Yeah, definitely not.
Yeah,
we've got you. We've got you. We know what it takes to break the cycles.
Yes.
And it's really, really tough. And that's why
we have so much compassion.
We do. We really do. And again, if you have a question, or if you are confused or whatever, or you're like, I need you to spell it out a little more clearly for me, let us know.
Yeah.
Because we want this to be very practical, like tools, like a really solid gardening tool. That's what we're trying to create here. Yeah. So feedback or questions really help us to shape that.
Also, there's a lot of resources in the school, which is, it's quite a different experience to, take a course or use one of the resources in the school, which is much more of a structured, step-by-step kind of handheld process, guiding you through these, tools and getting you into practice, working with your own experiences. And in the podcast, we're, exploring concepts and we're sharing stories.
And much more free form.
Much more free form. Yeah. So if you are interested in and looking to apply it to your own life in a way that's more structured
and more intensive,
then look at the website, and that's magenta.fm. You can always email us also at hello@magenta.fm. Leave comments.
Yeah. We will
We'd love to
respond.
hear from you.
Yeah.
And we will see you again soon. Thank you for
Awesome.
listening.
Thank you. Thanks, Rachel. That was fun.
Yeah.